Imaging in everyday life. So far in this book, imaging has been presented as a powerful device to achieve major goals and objectives. And so it is. But imaging can be used in many lesser ways to smooth out the minor wrinkles of living. For example, my friend Dr. Charles L. Allen, the popular minister writer, tells a story in his book Perfect Peace about a woman who suffered from insomnia. Nothing very unusual about that. But her solution to the problem was interesting. She was a lover of flowers and a skilled arranger of them. And so, when sleep didn't come easily, lying there in the dark she would visualize a table with a handsome flower vase on it and 24 long-stemmed red roses lying beside it. She would hold the scene in her mind until it became almost real: the rich grain of the wood in the tabletop, the flowing curves of the vase, the pale green rose stems, the ruby petals glowing with velvety color. Then she would see herself slowly picking up the roses, one by one, and arranging them in the vase. First she would visualize the vase with one tall flower, then two, then three. Each carefully placed for artistic effect. Each time she added a flower, she would move back a few paces and study the composition. And according to Charles Allen, she never was able to complete the arrangement with all 24 flowers, because she always fell asleep. Suppose you would like to redecorate a room in your house, or buy new furniture for the patio. Suppose, as is so often the case, you don't think you can afford to do it right away. What is to prevent you from imaging that room or that patio just the way you would like to have it? Fill in all the details. The color of the curtains, the pattern of the carpet, the kind of mirror you want above the mantelpiece. See it all in your mind's eye. It is a lot of fun, it doesn't cost a thing, and the more vivid the image, the better chance that someday it will become a reality. When James Whistler, the great American painter, was first married, he and his wife were so poor that the only furniture they had was a bed. But this did not discourage them. In every empty room of their modest house they sketched with chalk, on the floor, the outline of each piece of additional furniture that they intended to have someday. Inside the outline they added a detailed description of what it would look like. They imaged their dream house furnished just as they wanted it to be. And the time came when that vision became a happy reality. Why? Because they pushed beyond the fuzzy, indistinct yearnings that many people settle for and focused their wishes with great intensity of imaging. Those chalk marks and detailed descriptions on the floor gave a substance and a reality to the dream that otherwise it would never have had. And their unconscious minds went to work instantly, providing the energy and the drive and the confidence that the young couple needed to reach their goal. Suppose you would like to travel. Do you want to visit England or Italy, or see the Grand Canyon, or go flying down to Rio? Don't just sit and vaguely wish. Go to a travel bureau. Get some brochures. Better still, get some maps and trace the route you would like to follow. Go to the library and take out some history books. Learn all you can about the place you want to visit, its history, the people who are living there. Then image yourself against that background. If your dream is visiting the Holy Land, visualize yourself standing in Bethany at the spot where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. See yourself on the shores of Galilee where he commanded the wind and the waves to be still. Tell yourself that the same waves and the same wind are still there, waiting for you to visit them. Imagine yourself in Jerusalem, putting your hand on the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane or at the tomb where the stone was rolled away. Don't let negative considerations like lack of money creep in, because your unconscious mind will seize upon a negative signal just as readily as it will react to a positive one. Does this kind of dreaming, which is just another form of imaging, guarantee that someday you will find yourself in Rio, or in the Holy Land, or in England or Italy? No, it doesn't. Life doesn't hand out ironclad guarantees. But it raises the probabilities so enormously that it is foolish not to take advantage of it. The thing to remember is that an image vividly conceived and stubbornly held has a reality of its own. Once a young man spoke to me after I had made a speech in Los Angeles on the subject of positive thinking. He had a dream of going into electronics, building a small factory, and he described it in detail. He had it all worked out in his mind. But, he said, I don't have capital and I don't have any credit. I don't know if I will ever get it built. But it is built, I told him. You have already created this factory. It exists. In your mind. It is just a vision, he said, just a dream. That's great, I said. That is the first step and the most important step. Never tell yourself that your factory doesn't exist, because it does. You have already built it. It is there, imaged in your consciousness. The next step is to get it out of your head and onto a piece of ground somewhere. And you'll take that second step as surely as you took the first. It is just a matter of patience and persistence and determination and time. First built by imaging. You mean it's built, he said incredulously. You mean I have already built it? Gosh, that is an exciting idea. First the dream, I told him. The dream or image worked out in detail. The image so vivid that you can see it like a three-dimensional picture glowing in your mind. Then the hard work and the discipline and the willingness to take risks and the refusal to let go of the dream or let it fade. Put those elements together and you can't miss. You can't fail. You'll see. He went away, and I suppose I really never expected to see him again. But about a year later, when I was greeting people after a service at Marble Collegiate Church in New York, he came along in the line. Remember me, he said. Just wanted to say 2 words to you. It's built. Wonderful. I said to him. But remember, it was built all the time. Great athletes use imaging constantly, sometimes consciously, sometimes without being fully aware of what they are doing. Have you ever watched a champion high jumper just before he makes his jump? Usually he stares at the ground for a long moment before he begins his run. And in that moment he is visualizing himself sailing across the bar. He is flinging his image over the bar, you might say, and if his body fully accepts that image, it is probably going to follow. Years ago I heard a story about Jim Thorpe, the great American Indian athlete whose legendary feats in sports are still revered and remembered. With the rest of the American team, Thorpe was on his way to Europe by ship to compete in the Olympic Games. Each day the athletes would work out on the ship's deck, some running, some jumping, some lifting weights. The scene was one of furious activity. One of the coaches was astonished, therefore, to come upon Thorpe one day sitting on the deck, leaning back against a lifeboat, eyes closed, not even in his track suit. Thorpe, the coach said sharply, what do you think you're doing? The big, bronze athlete opened one eye. I'm watching myself win the decathlon, he said. And closed it again. Imaging. Thorpe had never heard of the word, but he had adopted the technique and he knew it was more valuable than any amount of mere physical preparation. He was seeing himself win the decathlon in advance. And when the event finally took place, the image became the reality. Well, you may say, suppose 2 or 3 other athletes from England or France or Germany had employed the same technique. What then? In that case, I would say, the contestant with the greatest physical endowments and the most vivid image of himself being victorious would win the event. But if the physical endowments were equal, then the owner of the strongest will to win, as reflected in that self-image of being the winner, would come away with the prize. My friend W. Clement Stone, a well-known Chicago insurance man, founded a magazine called Success Unlimited. Not long ago, it carried a fascinating article about a young graduate student named Steve DeVore. Steve, a psychology student, was reading a textbook on biofeedback one wintry afternoon and at times idly watching a TV program about championship bowling. Steve was an occasional bowler whose highest score was an unspectacular 163. But now, watching the champion bowlers reel off strings of strikes, he began to wonder if he might not somehow use the images on the TV screen to program his own mind and possibly increase his bowling skills. So, blocking out all other thoughts and making himself as relaxed as possible, he tried to impress on his memory the images of the top bowlers making their very high scores. When the program ended, he played the images back in his mind, just as if he had a videotape inside his head. Finally, still concentrating intensely, he went out to a nearby bowling alley. There again he replayed his mental tape, telling his mind to direct and control his body and telling his body to become an instrument of his mind. Steve DeVore then proceeded to bowl an unheard of 9 strikes in a row for a score of 286 out of a possible 300. In his second game he bowled 7 strikes. Then his concentration faltered, and his game began to slide downhill. But DeVore was so impressed with what imaging could do that he started his own company, called Cybervision, to market a system of thought to athletic teams and individuals. The results, according to some professional coaches who have tried it, are nothing short of amazing. Imaging can reach far beyond sports into almost every aspect of daily life. Suppose you are carrying a burden of guilt for some past mistake or transgression. Suppose you have tried the time-tested remedies. Acknowledging your fault, making restitution, asking God to forgive you. And still feel unworthy and troubled. This load of unresolved guilt is draining strength and purpose from you. Can imaging help? Perhaps it can. Try visualizing a blackboard with a jumble of disconnected words and phrases, or a tangle of scrawled mathematical problems with wrong answers. In short, a sorry record of mistakes. Then image a shining figure, the Lord Himself, sweeping a sponge or a damp cloth across that blackboard, wiping it clean, preparing it for another, stronger, better effort. The Lord has forgiven your sins and mistakes. Then forgive yourself, for if you don't, the old guilt circle will repeat itself. Run this total picture sequence over and over in your mind. What you are imaging is forgiveness and acceptance, and if the vision is vivid enough, a great sense of peace and well-being will follow. Suppose you are a victim of depression. Picture that doleful word spelled out in a gigantic electric sign on a mountaintop, with letters 10 feet tall. It can be seen at night for miles. Then image the first 2 and the 8th letters suddenly extinguished. What's left? 2 positive and vigorous words, press on. Picture yourself as confident. Are you facing some challenge in your job where you doubt your ability to cope? Image yourself meeting the challenge, solving the problem. And give thanks for that solution in advance. Picture yourself filled with a surge of confidence and energy that sweeps away doubts and fears. Image your mind coming alive with fresh, new energy, crackling with new concepts, teeming with new ideas. If you paint these images vividly enough, they may affect not only you but also the person or persons you are dealing with. In Australia, a couple of years ago, Ruth and I met a dynamic and attractive woman named Lorraine St. Clair. She was the Australian representative for a company that specialized in reproductions of antique jewelry. Lorraine had conceived the idea of displaying these items in a real antique breakfront where prospective customers could look through the glass and see pieces of jewelry on black or red velvet. The effect was stunning. Later, Lorraine came to visit us in New York. She was very interested in our church and in the way we lived our lives. She said she had no spiritual training herself, and she wanted to find out more about such things. Ruth told her about tithing and the spiritual rewards it brings. This seemed to fascinate Lorraine, and she became a tither herself. She told us that her company wanted her to go to Europe and try to establish a market there for the jewelry. She had no connections or contacts there, but someone had told her that if she could persuade one of the principal stores to take this merchandise, others would follow. So Lorraine fixed this goal in her mind. She began to image herself meeting the key marketing people and persuading them to carry the line of jewelry. She focused on this vision with great intensity before she left Australia and while she was flying to Europe. Upon arriving, she called a man who was a chief buyer for a well-known store. She told him that she had studied his merchandising techniques, this was true, and admired them very much. She also told him about herself and said that she had a line of jewelry that she hoped to establish. To her amazement, the man said that he would see her. Result? Just as she had imaged it. Instant success. Now, how often would the chief buyer from a great store respond to an unknown vendor of jewelry and look at her samples? Not very often. But Lorraine had imaged precisely that outcome. Had something reached out and influenced the man on the other end of the telephone wire? Again, who can say? Imaging can help in many other ways. Suppose you are torn with grief because a loved one has died. Surely it helps to image or visualize a future reunion with that person in the land that is fairer than day. If the person was old or frail or feeble, picture him as vigorous and vital, as he was in the prime of life. Image the wonderful conversations and activities you will share when you are with him once again. Picture his eyes full of joy and happiness because he is reunited with you. Forever. Once or twice I have had a vision of my father and later one of my brother, Bob, after they had left this earthly life. In both instances, they looked vibrant and youthful and happy. They seemed to know that I could see them, too, because they raised their hands in the old familiar gesture of greeting and affection as if to say, "Don't worry about us. Everything is all right. We'll see you later." Those experiences, I think, were a form of imaging carried one step further into a reality we are seldom allowed to glimpse. But that reality is eternally there. Image of a country home. There are other areas of imaging where things happen that are equally hard to understand. You may recall the clairvoyant vision of Mary Crow that I described in the first chapter of this book. Something similar happened years ago to some good friends of mine, Dr. William S. Bainbridge and his mother. Dr. Bainbridge's mother, a widow, grew tired of life in New York City and decided she wanted a place in the country. She had very definite ideas about the kind of place she wanted. She said she could visualize it clearly in her mind, right down to the last detail. But she and her son were unable to find one that suited her or that was like the place she imaged. Finally, they started praying about the problem, reading the Bible and asking for guidance. Meanwhile, the image in Mrs. Bainbridge's mind remained as clear as ever. As she was reading scripture one day, a certain passage seemed to leap out at her, "And let us arise, and go up to Bethel." Genesis 35 verse 3. She felt that it had great significance for her. Her son could think of no place in the New York area called Bethel, but Mrs. Bainbridge said there must be one. Furthermore, she felt a strange conviction that the house she was seeking was there. Finally, they discovered that there was indeed a town named Bethel in Connecticut, near Danbury. But when they drove up there and Mrs. Bainbridge described her dream house to a realtor, he shook his head. "There's no place like that around here that I know of," he said. "It's got to be here," Mrs. Bainbridge insisted. The realtor was sympathetic but firm. There was no such house in Bethel. So the Bainbridges went back to New York. 3 days later the realtor called them. "I was wrong," he said sheepishly. "There is such a house after all, just as you described it, that I wasn't aware of. But it is not for sale." Back went the Bainbridges to Bethel. When they saw the house, they were astounded. It matched Mrs. Bainbridge's image exactly. Furthermore, the owners said that within the past 48 hours a sudden change of jobs had made it necessary for them to leave town. Mrs. Bainbridge bought the house and lived in it happily for many years. "And let us arise, and go up to Bethel." Was it all just coincidence? Who can say? One thing seems certain: the mind has unexplored powers, and most of the time such powers remain unused. In our day-to-day activities, we are not using more than a fraction of our brain capacity. I have experienced this extra and normally unused power of the mind on various occasions myself. One night in a southern city, for example, I was getting ready to make a speech and needed a certain person's name. I just couldn't remember it. I looked through all my papers and couldn't find it. I was to go on stage in 5 minutes. I had to have this name, or at least I thought I did. I remembered that some psychiatrist had said that if you relax and call upon your deeper mind, which never forgets anything, your deeper mind will deliver what you need. It so happened that this talk was being given in a theater, and I had noticed an old rocking chair behind the curtain. I asked the chairman about the program and he said, "A lady is going to sing 2 songs before you are introduced." "Have her sing 3, I said. "I am going around behind the curtain and sit in that old rocking chair." So I went around back and sat in the rocking chair. "Now," I said, addressing my subconscious mind, "I understand that you never forget anything, and everything I ever did, thought, read or heard is stored down inside of you somewhere. I need this name. I know there is greater capacity in you than I normally use, and I have not called on you very often for a special favor. But now, subconscious mind, I want this piece of information and I want it right away. I've got to have it and I believe you are going to deliver it to me." After I said that, I sat back and relaxed. I could literally feel the subconscious mind down inside of myself going into high gear. I could almost hear the wheels spinning around. And when I came out from around the curtain, the name popped up like toast from the toaster. I went out on the platform and tried to tell my subconscious mind to deliver me some more material, but that was all it would give me that evening. What a strange tapestry this imaging is. So many patterns. So many threads. All interconnected in ways that sometimes seem to defy logical interpretation. But I am convinced that the basic premise is true. As Emerson said, the soul contains the event that shall befall it. Which is just another way of saying that if you image something strongly enough, you help to make that something happen. Imaging does affect future events. But the decision to do the imaging is yours. Finally, may I point out that imaging has its own formula: 1. The goal, 2. The purpose, 3. Prayer activity, 4. Thoughtful planning, 5. Innovative thinking, 6. Enthusiasm, 7. Organized hard work, and 8. Always holding the image of success firmly in mind. If this formula is faithfully carried out, the desired results will be achieved despite all difficulties or setbacks. I was asked to be the speaker at a big rally in Columbus, Ohio, on behalf of World Neighbors, a service organization engaged in helping deprived people abroad. The meeting was organized and directed by Dr. Roy Burkhart, an enthusiastic, dedicated, and able leader. He was also a confirmed positive thinker. When I arrived at the Columbus airport at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was in an almost torrential rainstorm accompanied by high winds that drove the rain in sheets. But there to welcome me with a big smile was Roy. "The hall is full," he cried. "The hall is full." Mystified, I replied, "Why, Roy, it is only 3 p.m. and the meeting is scheduled for 8 p.m. Certainly the hall cannot be filled 5 hours ahead of time." "Oh, yes, the hall is full," he insisted. Then it dawned upon me. He was visualizing the hall as full. He was imaging it packed to capacity, and it was a large auditorium at that. He took me to the hotel and the rain continued in a drenching downpour all afternoon and evening. Finally at 8 o'clock, when Roy and I and ex-Governor John W. Bricker walked onto the stage, that big hall was indeed full and people were standing. What accounted for that packed house? The imaging formula is the answer. A goal, a purpose, lots of prayer, planning, thinking, enthusiasm, organization, and always intense, continuous imaging. This overcame every adverse condition, including one of the worst rainstorms I have ever experienced. The hall is full. Life is full, also, and always will be if you so image it and forever keep God in it.